The stars glared coldly over the divided Earth, a planet fractured by old grudges and newer fears. Above it all, unseen and ancient, the architects observed. They had perfected their species beyond flaw, sculpting themselves with eons of genetic mastery into beings of symmetry, beauty, and intellect. Where nature had stumbled and chaos had forged crude life, the architects had intervened, designing themselves for excellence. Their civilization spanned 1,000 star systems, a pristine empire where disease, disorder, and imperfection had been abolished long ago. To them, humanity was a grim curiosity, a race birthed through agony, clawing through mud and blood without guidance. Every scar, every mutation, every flaw was a mark of struggle and defiance against a universe indifferent to their survival. To the architects, humanity was the sum of countless mistakes, stitched together by pain. They did not fear mankind. They studied it, cataloging its wars, its triumphs, its endless conflict with itself. At the time the architects made contact, Earth was still reeling from the Third Fragmentation War, its nations fractured into loose federations, uneasy alliances, and brutal city-states. The offer the architects extended seemed almost divine: join the greater union of life, be remade, and abandon their bloody history. Their emissaries descended in vessels of radiant white, crafted without seam or sound. In Paris, New Nairobi, Shenzhen, the Mississippi megaplex, they arrived at once, heralded by silver banners that bore the sigil of the spiral ascendant. Humanity trembled with a mixture of awe and terror. Leaders gathered, generals whispered, and old flags were dusted off for a new kind of diplomacy. The first words of the architect emissaries were simple, delivered in flawless translation. "We offer you perfection." At the Global Convergence Summit in Geneva, the architect representative known as Varun addressed the assembly of Earth's surviving powers. Standing 8 feet tall, draped in iridescent fibers that moved as though alive, Varun was a being of breathtaking symmetry. No flaw marred his form, no imperfection sullied his voice. "You are creatures of passion and chaos," he said, his voice resonant as a cathedral bell. "You fight because your minds are unbalanced. You suffer because your bodies are weak, your spirits unfocused. Join us and we will make you whole. We will uplift you, redesign your species as we have refined ourselves." At first, many bowed eagerly. The Federated States of Pacifica, the Hansa Collective, and the New Eurasian Bloc agreed to initial Reformation trials. Entire cities volunteered to be transformed. Clinics rose overnight, pulsing with biolight, where humans entered frail and broken and emerged as something different, taller, leaner, stronger. Diseases were erased, flaws corrected, memories sharpened, anger dulled, fear suppressed. But not everyone accepted. The free southern republics, remnants of the old Andes Union, the Mongolian Wastes Confederacy, and the fractured states of West Africa resisted. They remembered the old stories of gods descending with gifts that cost souls in the end. They distrusted beauty that came without sacrifice. They watched the new refined humans with suspicion, noting their odd stillness, their chilling efficiency. Something vital seemed missing behind their perfect smiles. Resistance brewed quietly at first. In abandoned cities and hidden enclaves, the old ways were preserved. Tribes, militias, and rogue scientists worked feverishly to understand the transformations and the true intent behind them. Rumors spread like wildfire through underground networks. The architects had erased more than disease. They had clipped away rage, rebellion, creativity. Those who accepted the gift were no longer truly human. Among the dissidents rose a name: Elena Calder. Once a decorated general of the old European Defense Corps, she had lost her family to one of the early refinement accidents, incidents officially denied by the pacified governments but whispered of in the dark. Calder rallied the broken and the stubborn, the dreamers and the killers, forging them into the Bastion Alliance. Their motto was simple: "We are forged in pain, we will not be remade." Calder knew they could not face the architects directly. Their technology was centuries beyond anything human science could hope to match. But humans had one weapon the architects had never fully understood: the capacity to adapt through suffering. In hidden laboratories beneath the Andes, under the battered domes of lunar outposts, and within the flooded remains of Mumbai, human scientists began new, forbidden experiments. Not refinement, evolution, not perfection, transformation through ordeal. They pushed genetics to brutal new frontiers, not smoothing over flaws but harnessing them. New breeds of soldiers, designed to embrace pain, to grow stronger through damage, began to emerge. Meanwhile, the architects moved with clinical precision. More cities fell into their fold. Entire continents gleamed with the glassy sheen of integration. Humanity's culture, its chaos and color, began to wither beneath the architect's sterile light. In orbit, great halls were constructed, massive latticeworks of living metal designed to be way stations for the final phase of transformation. Earth itself was to be remade, its biosphere tamed, its weather regulated, its remaining flaws excised. Yet a fire smoldered still in the broken places of Earth. In the ruins, among the forgotten and the wounded, something ancient stirred, a hunger not for perfection but for freedom, for the right to be scarred, to fall and rise again. As the architect fleet assembled above Earth, preparing for the final wave of integration, Elena Calder stood atop a crumbling skyscraper in the heart of old Detroit, watching the sterile clouds gather. The first wave of the war to come was already falling, elegant silver dropships descending like rain. Around her, the Bastion Alliance stood ready, weapons forged from stolen technology and raw human will. They would not kneel. They would not accept perfection at the price of their souls. They would show the architects the true cost of pain. An Earth battered and scarred would burn before it was remade. The first battle was not won, it was survived. When the silver dropships opened their underbellies, the warriors who emerged were not the cold architects themselves, but their refined. Once human, now altered into paragons of discipline and grace, they moved with chilling synchronization. Armor fused to living tissue, plasma rifles integrated into nerve endings, they advanced like a tide of inevitability. The Bastion Alliance struck from the shadows. Molten bullets, improvised rail weapons, and corrosive gas tore through the first waves, yet for every refine that fell, two more advanced. Their minds linked through architect-designed hives, they were no longer their own, they fought without hesitation, without fear. Calder led from the front, her armor patched from 100 scraps of defeated enemies, her voice cutting through the chaos with brutal clarity. Every death was catalogued, every mistake learned from. Human forces adapted not day by day but moment by moment, forcing tactical evolutions in real time. In the blood-soaked alleys of Detroit's ruins, humans rediscovered an ancient truth. Pain was not the enemy, it was the forge. The architects underestimated the stubborn, savage evolution unfolding before their sterile eyes. In a hidden command bunker deep beneath the Andes, Dr. Mikhail Vereznov, the architect of the Bastion's Genetic Awakening Project, initiated Phase 2 of the plan. He called it exsurgo, Latin for to rise. It was not beautiful, it was violent. Subjects of the exsurgo initiative, already hardened by war, underwent controlled trauma infusions. Muscles and bones fractured and healed at accelerated rates. Neural pathways were reforged under extreme sensory overload. Immune systems were overloaded, crushed, and rebuilt. They became something the architects had no model for: chaotic evolution at hypervelocity. Their first true field test came when the city of Cairo, now a glittering citadel of refined order, was targeted for disruption. The mission was simple in design, catastrophic in ambition. Disrupt the architect control node hidden beneath the pyramids of Giza, a node that coordinated all refined units across North Africa. The exsurgo operatives, codenamed the Scalded for the horrific scars that marked their rebirth, were unleashed. They moved through the city like wildfire. They did not rely on unified formations or pristine communications. They moved in irregular patterns, flanking, breaking, feigning retreats, then striking with brutal ingenuity. Improvised explosives using architect alloy shards, neural disruptor pulses cannibalized from fallen enemies, hand-to-hand ambushes that exploited the refine's lack of emotional intuition. The control node was destroyed by a detonated fusion core smuggled inside a hacked medical drone. When the blast subsided and the dust cleared, an entire swath of refined soldiers stood paralyzed, cut off from their guiding intelligence. It was the first human victory, and it changed everything. The architects convened in high orbit aboard the Ascendant Tribunal, a colossal mind council constructed from semi-organic thought steel. Varun, the first emissary, stood in the center of the convocation, his countenance still serene but threaded with the first hints of concern. They reject correction, Varun said, examining the latest data streams. They deform under pressure, but the deformation strengthens rather than breaks them. Another architect, luminous and severe, replied, "They are fracturing in unpredictable ways. They generate deviation instead of order. Such behavior must be isolated and eradicated before systemic contagion." A third chimed in, ancient beyond reckoning. "The flaw is foundational. They are evolved through adversity, not designed for success. They must be unmade." The decision was cold and final. Total sterilization protocols were initiated. Above the Earth's atmosphere, Titanic architect vessels began the slow, grim process of planetary correction. Atmospheric dispersers released waves of nanite plagues designed to rewrite biology at the cellular level. Magnetic lattice fields disrupted unshielded electronics. Every bastion of human resistance marked on their charts was targeted for absolute elimination. Earth itself began to weep under the assault. Skies darkened with synthetic clouds. Rivers ran strange and poisonous. Satellites winked out, leaving entire continents blind and deaf. But humans were already adapting. The Bastion Alliance had seen the coming darkness. In the weeks after Cairo, their scientists had deciphered enough of architect biotech to develop the Crucible shields, adaptive nanomesh fields that repelled the architect nanites by shifting their molecular patterns faster than the invaders could correct. Cities once thought lost flickered back to life under the Crucible domes. Underground enclaves sprouted like fungi in the dark. New guerrilla cells, often composed of nothing more than farmers, scavengers, and street gangs, armed with hastily adapted technologies, fought with desperate brilliance. In the deserts of what was once Nevada, Calder led a daring strike against the architect dispersal engines. Her forces, riding heavily modified mag vehicles and wearing patchwork shielding, charged across irradiated salt flats under blackened skies. The battle was a cacophony of particle fire and kinetic bombardments, but it was not the architects who won that day. It was a lone human sniper, an Exergo volunteer who had survived 4 near-death transformations, who climbed the skeletal remains of an ancient hotel and through a storm of distortion, placed a single round directly into the heart of the disperser's command core. The sky above the Western Hemisphere cleared for the first time in months. Victory, however, was a razor-thin edge. The more the Bastion adapted, the more brutal the architects became. Planetary bombardments grew indiscriminate. Civilian enclaves were crushed, cultural relics vaporized. Every victory carried the weight of devastating retaliation. In one final act of calculated cruelty, the architects unleashed the Scourging Seed, a self-replicating bioform designed to hunt and erase chaotic lifeforms. Invisible, ever-evolving, impossible to predict. Across Earth, the scourging began. Yet as Alina Calder stood atop the battered walls of Bastion Prime, humanity's last great fortress, she knew something had shifted. The architects had revealed their fear. In their pursuit of perfection, they had engineered themselves into predictability, but humans, born of pain, embraced chaos. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to survive, and survival, not perfection, was the universe's true law. Battered, bleeding, and unbroken, humanity prepared for the next phase. Not retreat. Not surrender. Evolution. Real evolution. And the architects in their cold magnificence had no idea what was coming for them. The scourging seeds ravaged the earth with a merciless hunger. Entire towns vanished overnight, absorbed into the writhing black soil where the seeds rooted themselves. At first, they adapted faster than humanity could fight. Fire, radiation, chemical weapons all failed. Every solution spawned only deadlier iterations. But pain was the forge, and humanity learned. Dr. Vereznov, the architect of the Exergo project, returned from self-imposed exile with a new horror, the chimeric protocols. The protocols, buried in ancient genetic code, unlocked a savage response buried deep within human DNA, a last-resort blueprint for catastrophic biological resistance. It required sacrifice. Volunteers had to endure extreme physical metamorphosis, shedding the traditional human form for something monstrous, something capable of consuming the seeds as fuel for further evolution. They called themselves the worms, creatures of scale, muscle, and rage, born to turn infection against the architects. Where seeds fell, worms rose. In the shattered remains of Mexico City, the first worm swarm met the scourging seed head-on. Streets cracked under the force of their battle. Concrete turned to slag as bioplasmic acids clashed with hyperadaptive tissue. The sky was blackened by the smoke of dying organisms. In the end, it was not beauty that endured. It was violence and resilience, fused together into something the architects had no language for. The architects responded by deploying their true enforcers, the curators. The curators were not designed for conquest, they were made for extinction. Massive constructs of conscious energy and molecular armor, they descended like gods of old, each one capable of sterilizing entire continents. Their arrival shifted the battle from desperate guerrilla warfare to a war for existence itself. In the ruins of Johannesburg, a curator materialized, its body shimmering with quantum refractors, its mind operating on a plane beyond causality. It unleashed a pulse that atomized flesh and stone alike, rewriting the very fabric of matter. Yet it encountered something alien even to its ancient programming, a resistance that learned mid-destruction. Human weapons, now forged with the stolen secrets of the architect's quantum folding technologies, began to adapt on the fly. Pulse cannons shifted frequencies between shots. Infantry armor hardened itself against specific kinetic signatures milliseconds before impact. Calder's Bastion alliance struck back not with brute force but with guerrilla brilliance. Bombing runs crafted from hijacked meteor fragments, biological plagues tailored to target curator reaction pathways, suicide squads willing to bear weapons that would kill them alongside their target. One by one, the curators fell. The cost was unimaginable. Entire bloodlines perished, cultures dissolved into ash, Earth itself shuddered under the strain. Yet for every fallen city, for every cratered wasteland, something new and terrible rose from the wreckage, a humanity unrecognizable even to itself, evolving faster than design, stronger than destiny. The architects convened in a state of disarray never before witnessed among their kind. On the ascendant tribunal, Varun stood before the gathered primes, his once immaculate form now subtly marred by stress fractures invisible to human eyes but blinding to those who knew perfection. "They are no longer what they were," Varun said. "They have embraced entropy they are becoming." A prime so ancient it bore the title Origin Vector replied, "They cannot be permitted to continue. Their existence endangers all we have built." Another prime, glimmering with the cold light of logic, spoke, "Then we must annihilate the experiment." The architects made their decision. They would tear the Earth from its orbit, reduce it to debris, and erase all trace of humanity from the universe. A weapon of unspeakable power was drawn forth from the forbidden archives, the anathema core, a singularity bomb designed to unmake an entire planetary system. It was deployed within days. The anathema core descended from high orbit, cloaked in rippling dimensional fractures, a black sun falling toward Earth's heart. The Bastion Alliance watched the sky rip open. For the first time, even Calder felt the sting of despair. There was no weapon to destroy a singularity, no soldier to outrun the devouring collapse. But there was an idea. A suicidal, impossible idea. The worm ascendants, fused with the deepest, rawest instincts of survival, proposed a sacrifice. Using the unstable quantum tunneling engines salvaged from the destroyed curators, they could transport the anathema core, not destroy it but displace it. The cost would be their lives. There was no hesitation. On the plains of old Kansas, the worms assembled for their final hunt. They tore through the oncoming waves of refined and curators alike, their bodies warping reality around them through sheer biological fury. The anathema core loomed above them, a wound in space. They leapt one after another, slamming quantum anchors into the core's event horizon, their bodies unraveling into energy as the engines flared. Space twisted, time cracked. And then in a shudder that echoed across the stars, the core vanished, ripped from Earth's fate. The worms were gone. Humanity remained. The Earth, broken beyond recognition, spinning in a poisoned sky, still turned. The architects, having witnessed an event they had no protocol for, faltered. For the first time in millennia, they withdrew. But they had not retreated in surrender, only in calculation. Varun, scarred by failure, spoke one final message to humanity before vanishing into the void. "You are chaos made flesh, we cannot perfect you, therefore we must abandon you." Above the smoldering world, architect vessels folded space around themselves and disappeared. The war was over. But victory was not salvation. The Earth was a shattered crucible. The Bastion Alliance stood among the ruins, weary, bleeding, forever changed. Calder, standing before the last flag of old humanity, raised it into the dying light of a crimson sun. "We were designed for nothing," she whispered to the wind. "We became through everything." The age of architects ended. The age of humanity, raw and remade, was just beginning. The Earth healed in ways no one could have predicted. Not with the return of old ecosystems or the rebuilding of lost cities, but with evolution, relentless and brutal, carving a new world from the ruins. The survivors of the War of Refinement, the Bastion Alliance, the free tribes, the remnants of the lunar outposts gathered across the blackened continents. Old nations no longer mattered, only resilience and will determined who would lead. From the scorched ashes of old Johannesburg, the first council of humanity's rebirth was formed. They named themselves the Conquered of Ash. The Conquered's mandate was clear: never again would humanity bow to external perfection. They would embrace their nature, cultivate strength through ordeal, forge a civilization that grew sharper with every scar. They would not erase their flaws, they would master them. In the charred valleys of what was once the Colorado Basin, immense foundries were built, not factories of mass production but crucibles of selective evolution. New technologies, born from architect relics and human ferocity, allowed individuals to undergo controlled metamorphoses, tailored not for aesthetics or uniformity but for survival under extremity. Whole bloodlines volunteered to adapt. Nomad scholars rewrote the human genome with languages of pain and triumph. Warriors sprouted adaptive dermal plating under ultraviolet skies. Scholars evolved minds capable of threading quantum fields through sheer intuition. Farmers bred resilience into their veins to withstand poisoned soils and shattered climates. A species that had once been the byproduct of blind chaos became the architects of their own ordeal. In orbit, salvaged architect vessels were refitted not as monuments to lost glory, but as armories, mobile fortresses bristling with every weapon humanity could fashion. The conquered knew the architects would not stay away forever. Somewhere beyond the broken black of the stars, they watched, recalculating, fearing what they had birthed and abandoned. The scars of the war ran deep. Entire cities became grave monuments, fields of steel and glass twisted into cathedrals of memory. Within them, the stories of every fallen warrior were encoded into living crystals, songs of pain, rebellion, and triumph. Children were raised not to fear hardship but to seek it, to court failure as the first step toward power. No more dreams of a utopian order. Humanity did not dream of peace. They dreamed of dominion. Under the conquered's leadership, humanity expanded outward once more. The lunar colonies, long isolated during the scourging, reconnected with Earth. Mars, once a fledgling project, erupted into life as conquered engineers terraformed it through sheer technological audacity, using techniques so violent they shattered ancient Martian crust to release hidden reservoirs of gases. New ships, armored with restructured architect alloys and powered by unstable fusion cores, hurled themselves into the void. No longer explorers. No longer supplicants. Conquerors. The first contact with alien life beyond the architects came on the edge of the Alpha Scorpii system. The Exavolk, a crystalline intelligence that had transcended biological life, encountered conquered scouts near the remnants of a dead star. They attempted diplomacy, offering knowledge in exchange for compliance. The conquered answered not with treaties but with demonstration. A fleet of Warden-class dreadnoughts warped into their system, establishing orbital dominance within hours. The Exavolk, who had evolved over millions of years without conflict, found themselves unable to respond to the brutal adaptability of humanity's new fleets. In less than a week, Alpha Scorpii belonged to the conquered. The message was clear. Earth's children had inherited not a tradition of conquest, but a necessity of dominance born from survival against existential extermination. The conquered continued to spread. In the void, rogue human factions emerged, tribes of adapted exiles who rejected even the loose governance of the conquered, preferring instead to test themselves in the brutal wilderness of unclaimed systems. They were called the fractured, strange, terrifying, endlessly creative. Some fused their bodies with machines, becoming metallic predators stalking the silent black. Others altered their cognition, existing simultaneously in multiple quantum states. A few became legends, their very names enough to make the most ancient civilizations withdraw rather than face them. Yet not all welcomed humanity's rise. Across the old pathways of architect dominion, whispers began to circulate. The architects had not vanished into the dark to lick their wounds. They had retreated to their origin worlds, to awaken something older and more terrible than themselves. The Eidolon forges. Creations from a time before design, before order, a last, forbidden hope should perfection ever face extinction. As humanity colonized the shattered rim worlds of the galaxy, the architects returned. Not as emissaries. Not as overseers. But as destroyers wielding weapons that bled through dimensions, unraveling reality itself. The Second War had begun, and this time humanity was ready. The first clash came on the molten world of Argus IX, where a newly established conquered colony faced an Eidolon incursion. Behemoths of liquid entropy, the Eidolon constructs ripped through defensive grids with contemptuous ease. Architect fleets darkened the stars above, moving in patterns so complex they fractured sensor arrays. Yet in the burning ruins, humanity adapted again. Calder's legacy endured in her heirs, generals who had no fear of death, commanders who had been shaped not by tradition but by annihilation. Colonel Vera Calder, Elena's grandchild, led the first successful counterassault against an Eidolon corps. Her forces, armed with evolution-forged weaponry and unstable molecular blades, pierced the heart of the construct by collapsing its quantum anchors, turning its impossible existence against itself. The architects witnessed the impossible again. Not through raw strength, not through design, through pain, will, and evolution unbound. The war raged outward across system after system, as conquered fleets learned, adapted, overcame. Every loss was weaponized into new strategies. Every failure became the seed of victory. The architects had built themselves to ascend without struggle. Humanity had built themselves to rise through struggle. And the galaxy itself began to tremble under the thunder of the clash. But the final confrontation was yet to come. A place whispered only among the oldest architect records. A world where the first act of perfection had been conceived. The bastion of origin. Humanity would march there. Not as pilgrims, not as invaders, but as the rightful heirs of the universe's true law. Not perfection, not order, but evolution through pain, through fire, through unbreakable will. And the architects would finally understand what they had unleashed. Not a rival civilization, not a corrupted species, but a force that could not be stopped. A force that would inherit the stars. The fleet of humanity, battered yet unbroken, emerged from the edge of the abyss surrounding the bastion of origin. It was a world like no other, suspended at the intersection of gravity wells from a collapsed trinary star system, hidden by the labyrinth of warped spacetime. A fortress world not built but woven into existence, saturated with the essence of the architect's first and greatest act of creation, themselves. The conquered armada, a tapestry of technologies and mutations unrecognizable from anything that had ever risen from Earth, arrayed itself in a formation that no ancient battle doctrine could describe. Each ship a living extension of its crew, each weapon adapted to the neurosignature of its wielder, each decision made in moments, not meetings. Ahead, the architect remnant waited. An armada vast enough to blot out stars. Eidolon constructs stitched to their ranks warforms of impossible geometry, weapons that sang with the death rattles of dying dimensions. And at their heart, the Prime Codex, the mind core of architect civilization, a consciousness forged from the essence of countless ascendants, pure, unsullied by time or descent. The bastion of origin was not merely defended. It was the architects, and they would not yield it. The conquered did not send envoys, they did not waste words. They attacked. The void burned with fury. Architect warforms twisted the fabric of real space, tearing conquered vessels from existence before a single shot could be fired. Entire flotillas blinked out, consumed by gravitational riptides. Eidolon monstrosities uncoiled from hidden folds, tearing through the first wave with entropy-stitched claws. But humanity adapted. Commanders integrated real-time losses into evolving strategies. Neural-linked crews shifted ship configurations mid-battle, their vessels mutating like living predators. What was lost to dimensional collapse was regained through ambushes hidden inside weaponized event horizons. No strategy remained static, no sacrifice was wasted, no terror went unstudied. On the scorched field of orbit, a weapon unlike any other was unleashed. Project Ka was born. A singularity breach device created from salvaged architect cores and fueled by the living rage of the Exergo successors, it tore through space itself, creating living wounds that fed on certainty. Architect formations collapsed around it, their perfect maneuvers undone by a weapon they could not predict, could not account for because it thrived on randomness. It bought the conquered their chance. Colonel Vera Calder, aboard the flagship Indomitable Requiem, led the final strike. Her ship, a cathedral of scars and rebirth, bore her and her warriors through the architect line, each impact, each loss only fueling the momentum toward the bastion's surface. As the Requiem plunged into the lower atmosphere, Calder and her vanguard deployed. They were no longer fully human by the old definitions. They were scars given form, flesh fused with energy, memory intertwined with probability, pain transmuted into evolution. They struck the bastion like a blade forged from agony and triumph. The ground itself fought them, reconfiguring, lashing out with storms of annihilation and floods of anti-thought. Architect constructs rose in endless waves. Geometry screamed as the very laws of nature bent against their advance. Still they climbed. Still they fought. At the apex of the bastion, the prime codex awaited. A being of incandescent symmetry, a mind so vast that its mere presence crushed lesser minds into oblivion. It spoke not with words, but with the gravity of inevitability. "You are error made manifest," the codex thundered into the minds of the vanguard. "You are chaos without end, you must be undone." Calder answered by drawing the blade of becoming, a weapon not of steel, not of plasma, but of distilled human will, forged from the cumulative pain and triumph of every soul that had fought and died since the first stone was lifted in rage on primitive Earth. She charged. The battle that followed could not be called a duel. It was the clash of two philosophies made flesh. The Codex wielded certainty, wielded inevitability, wielded perfection itself. Calder wielded pain, adaptation, change without end. She fell 100 times, died 1,000 deaths in the fractured timelines wrought by the Codex. Each time she rose, changed, stronger, more unpredictable. In a final moment that split the fabric of possibility, she pierced the heart of the Prime Codex. The Codex, the architect's first and greatest dream, shattered. A scream echoed through the bastion, through the architect fleets, through the very bones of the galaxy. And then silence. The architect fleets, bereft of unity, collapsed into chaos. Eidolon constructs unspooled into inert clouds of matter. The bastion crumbled not in explosion, but in quiet defeat, its foundations unmade. Humanity stood victorious. But it was not a victory of annihilation. The conquered made no claim to the ruins. They did not enslave the broken remnants of the architect species. They offered no demands, no ultimatums. They simply remained. Proved that perfection was not the apex. That struggle was not shame. That pain was not weakness. It was the crucible of true ascendance. The conquered turned outward, their fleets scattering to the edges of the galaxy, not as tyrants, not as saviors. As a force beyond comprehension. Whispered names filled the void between stars. The scorched airs. The pain-forged. The crimson architects. Wherever life grew stagnant, wherever civilizations grew complacent in their splendor, they would find themselves facing the descendants of Earth. Not to conquer, not to destroy, but to challenge, to force change, to break the rod of perfection with the hammer of ordeal. Calder's name was etched not into stone, not into metal, but into the genetic memory of an entire species that would never stop rising, never stop evolving. Humanity, once the afterthought of a pristine galaxy, had become its engine of renewal. And the stars, once cold and indifferent, now burned with the fire of a people who had earned their place among them. Not by design, not by blessing, but by becoming, by pain, by will, forever,